Your water bill in the American Southwest is not just paying for water anymore. It is paying off a century of cheap water promises that are finally coming due. The river that built Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and Las Vegas is shrinking. But the pipes, canals, pumps, bonds, and replacement projects still have to be paid for. That is the silent mortgage. You never signed it. But if you live in the Southwest, it is being loaded onto your household, one rate hike at a time. This is not a story about faucets suddenly running dry. That is the easy version, and it is probably wrong. The bond market and advanced engineering will keep replacement supplies moving into cities for a long time. The real crisis arrives as an invoice. Higher rates, bigger fixed charges, emergency infrastructure, and household bills that climb even when people conserve. That is why this crisis is so easy to miss. It looks less like collapse and more like another line item on a monthly statement. The pain is financial before it is physical. The question is not simply whether the Southwest can find water. The question is who can still afford it once the cheap version disappears. 40 million people depend on the Colorado River. 5 million acres of farmland drink from it, and the gross domestic product of 7 states and 2 nations runs on it. But the arithmetic is no longer gentle. Consumptive use and system losses have averaged roughly 15.34 million acre-feet per year over recent decades, while climate-driven runoff declines collide with another 1.2 million acre-feet lost annually to evaporation and seepage alone. If nothing changes aggressively, consumption will exceed natural flow by an estimated 3.6 million acre-feet every year. That would drain Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the 2 reservoirs that together hold about 92% of the basin's total storage. For a century, federal engineering let the region ignore its own geography. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Law of the River, signed in 1922, made Rocky Mountain snowmelt feel like a permanent urban utility. Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and Las Vegas grew on gravity-fed water delivered below the cost of producing it. That miracle has expired. Operating guidelines for the river lapse in 2026, and recent proposals to conserve 3.2 million acre-feet through 2028 confirm what the growth machine avoided saying out loud. Water unlimited expansion across the Southwest is permanently finished. Cheap water was a political choice. More than 130 years ago, Major John Wesley Powell explored the Colorado and warned that the land west of the 100th meridian had hard hydrological limits. Settlement that ignored those limits would fail. Washington ignored him. The Desert Land Act of 1877 and the Carey Act of 1894 pushed settlers into arid territory, while private irrigation ventures collapsed because they lacked the money and engineering to tame desert water at scale. Congress answered with the Reclamation Act of 1902, creating the Bureau of Reclamation and authorizing massive dams, reservoirs, and canals funded by public land revenues. Taxpayers across the country bankrolled desert settlement. But the megadams were never meant to repay themselves through water sales alone. Planners paired water delivery with hydroelectric power, using turbine profits from Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam to cover the capital costs of storage and conveyance. Water was priced below what it cost to procure. An entire regional economy grew on an artificial discount. California's Metropolitan Water District perfected the model. Property tax revenues and power subsidies kept wholesale prices so low that nearby communities gave up their own groundwater systems and annexed into MET's service territory. The political machine was simple. Water bureaucrats, elected officials, and real estate developers all benefited from expansion immediately. The costs arrived later, landing on citizens who had not yet been born. The Central Arizona Project shows how deep the subsidy ran. Congress authorized a 336-mile canal to pump Colorado River water uphill to Phoenix and Tucson, a project costing over $4 billion. Under the original repayment structure, agriculture's capital contribution was $2 per acre-foot, interest-free. A UCLA study makes the hidden price gap plain. It examined 217 diversions by 172 water districts and found that open market water now averages $853 per acre-foot. Municipal users pay around $512. Agricultural districts pay roughly $30 per acre-foot, and nearly a quarter of agricultural diversions are billed at zero. That is not a market price. It is a political artifact. For decades, the Southwest treated water as cheap because federal subsidies, power revenues, tax-exempt debt, and seniority rules buried the real cost. The foundation of that system is a document signed in 1922, and the document contains a math error. 7 basin states met in Santa Fe under Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover and divided the Colorado River at Lee Ferry, Arizona. The upper basin received 7.5 million acre-feet per year. The lower basin received 7.5 million. A 1944 treaty added another 1.5 million acre-feet from Mexico, bringing total allocated use to 16.5 million acre-feet per year. The negotiators relied on flow measurements from an unusually wet stretch in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They assumed the river delivered an average of 16.4 million acre-feet annually. U.S. Geological Survey hydrologist Eugene Clyde LaRue ran the numbers independently and found the reliable long-term yield was closer to 15.2 million. The Bureau of Reclamation treated LaRue's work as politically inconvenient and buried it. The compact also ignored reservoir evaporation, transit losses, and long-term climatic shifts. The result was paper water, legal volumes that existed in contracts and planning documents, but not reliably in the river. Lake Mead and Lake Powell hid the mistake for decades. Together, they held 60 million acre-feet of storage, nearly 4 full years of average flow, sitting in concrete. Upper basin states developed slowly, so the lower basin pulled surplus and built that surplus into population models as if it were permanent. Then, the 21st century mega-drought shredded the assumption. Combined storage has fallen to roughly 36% of capacity. The buffer that concealed a century of overallocation is nearly gone. The financial system built on that buffer is enormous. Desert cities financed growth through the municipal bond market, a $4 trillion machine with over $300 billion in water and sewer revenue bonds outstanding. A utility sells bonds to investors and repays them over 30 to 40 years using customer water bills as collateral. Because the interest is tax-exempt, investors accept lower rates, which acts as another hidden federal subsidy. Between 1970 and 2018, the default rate on rated water bonds was effectively zero. Investors treated Southwestern water debt as one of the safest bets in fixed income. That confidence rested on backward-looking risk models. Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor's traditionally judged water utilities by debt service coverage ratios, cash reserves, and historical revenue trends. They paid less attention to whether the physical resource behind those revenues was shrinking. A 2010 series report exposed the absurdity. Phoenix and Glendale held pristine AAA ratings despite severe supply constraints. The Los Angeles water system carried the highest water risk score among major utilities. yet still held AA+ and AA2 ratings from Fitch and Moody's. Wall Street lent cheaply to cities whose water supply was evaporating, and the cheap loans enabled more growth in places already under stress. The finance system was measuring the borrower while ignoring the river. Now that blindness is cracking. Standard & Poor's revised the outlook on the San Diego County Water Authority to negative, citing structural declines in water sales against rigidly rising fixed costs. Moody's warned that long-term credit profiles across the basin will split sharply. Utilities with diversified portfolios and senior water rights can survive cuts. Unhedged utilities face severe headwinds. Downgrades across the municipal water sector outpaced upgrades in the first quarter of 2026. The bond market is starting to notice what the hydrology has been saying for years. The household bill rises because the utility business model has a structural flaw. Debt service on bonds, pipe maintenance, treatment plant operations, and administration make up 70 to 90% of a water utility's total costs. These costs are fixed. They do not shrink when residents use less water. Yet utilities have historically collected most of their revenue through volumetric charges, meaning customers pay per gallon consumed. That worked when population and per capita water use were rising. It breaks when conservation succeeds. Across the Colorado River Basin, cities cut per capita water use by 18%, while regional population rose 24%. Southern Nevada cut per capita consumption by 58% since 2002. Conservation worked. And it broke the revenue model. When people use less, sales revenue falls, but bond payments do not. Utilities raise the price per unit to close the gap. Higher prices push people to conserve more, sales fall again, and another rate hike follows. Analysts call this the conservation death spiral. The perverse part is that households can do exactly what drought policy asks and still be punished by the bill. Families shorten showers, tear out lawns, follow drought rules, and still open a higher charge. They are no longer paying only for water. They are paying for concrete, steel, tunnels, and 30-year promises. The spiral gets worse when cheap imported river water must be replaced by manufactured supply. San Diego's Carlsbad desalination plant delivers water at roughly $3,350 per acre-foot. Central Arizona Project surface water runs around $365. Long-term modeling suggests that if Arizona were ever forced onto desalinated ocean supply, combined manufacturing and conveyance costs could exceed $7,000 per acre-foot by the 2040s. That is the real price shock. The old river water was cheap because it was subsidized and gravity-fed. The replacement water is engineered, pumped, treated, financed, and billed. San Diego residents are already living the future. Rates are expected to climb 61% through 2029, adding about $57 to the average monthly bill. The City Council approved back-to-back hikes of 14.7% and 14.5%. Then, 2 wet years arrived. Rainfall hit 140% of normal, member agencies shifted to cheaper local surface water, and wholesale sales fell 15% to 295,070 acre-feet against a budget projection of 367,386. The fixed costs did not fall. Desalination and pipeline bonds are on track to reach $66 million a year by 2046. That is why Standard & Poor's turned negative on the Water Authority. Two member districts, Fallbrook and Rainbow, filed legal proceedings to detach entirely, threatening to strand $140 million in infrastructure debt on the remaining ratepayers. During the council vote, working-class residents testified that they were choosing between paying for water and paying for food. That is what the silent mortgage looks like at the kitchen table. The region built an expensive water system around cheap assumptions. Now the assumptions are gone, but the debt remains. Phoenix is running the same equation with different numbers. Treatment chemicals rose 136%, raw water costs jumped 35%, and personnel expenses climbed 38% through the 2023 to 2024 fiscal cycle. The city approved rate hikes of 6.5% in October 2023, another 6.5% in March 2024, and 13% in March 2025. It also added a new stormwater excise tax and cut the baseline volume included in the monthly charge. Cool season allowances dropped from 6 units to 5, while summer allowances fell from 10 to 8, pushing more households into punitive pricing tiers. Las Vegas attacked the risk through infrastructure. The Southern Nevada Water Authority authorized a $2.55 billion capital plan and built a $1.35 billion third intake, a 3-mile, 20-foot diameter tunnel under Lake Mead, so the city can pull water even if the reservoir drops to dead pool. A $522 million low lake level pumping station brought emergency infrastructure costs to $1.87 billion. That cost is now hardwired into the debt burden of every Las Vegas ratepayer. SNWA also allocated $254.5 million for water resource acquisition, including interstate banking operations and the Brock Reservoir. The Metropolitan Water District of Southern California serves 19 million people, and its finances show the squeeze. Its debt service coverage ratio fell from 1.48 times in fiscal 2023 to 1.14 times in 2024, dangerously close to the 1.0 times legal bond covenant floor. Days of available cash tightened to just 111, forcing the district to lean on a $400 million revolving credit facility to maintain liquidity. MWD enacted consecutive 8.5% wholesale rate hikes in 2025 and 2026 and doubled its property tax rate. Phase 1 of Pure Water Southern California ballooned from $6.4 billion to $9.4 billion. And that debt service will cascade to 26 member agencies through higher wholesale charges. The list continues. Tucson Water's annual budget jumped 16% to $373.7 million, driven by a $42.9 million infrastructure surge funded through WIFA loans. A federal draft environmental impact statement proposed a 77.4% cut to Arizona's Colorado River allocation based on its junior priority status. Denver Water launched a 10-year, $2 billion capital overhaul. These are not optional upgrades. They are the cost of replacing a vanishing subsidy with physical infrastructure. The disappearing river also takes cheap electricity with it. Hoover Dam has already lost up to 70% of its hydroelectric generation capacity. At 1,075 feet of elevation on Lake Mead, pumping costs roughly double. At 1,050 feet, they triple. At 1,025 feet, they quadruple. Every foot of decline forces utilities to replace cheap federal hydropower with expensive spot market energy, and that cost flows straight to ratepayers. The 2025 Tier 1 shortage forced a 512,000 acre-foot reduction to Arizona, cutting 30% of the Central Arizona project's normal delivery. The weight lands hardest on households with the least room to absorb it. Between 1998 and 2020, water and sewer costs rose more than twice as fast as the broader consumer price index. The EPA affordability threshold for combined water and wastewater is 4.5% of household income. California uses a tighter standard of 1.5% of median household income. And by that measure, 21% of the state's water systems are already technically unaffordable. Academic projections estimate that the share of American households facing unaffordable water bills could triple, from 11.9% to 35.6% within a decade. California coastal cities already pay more than double Nevada districts, and up to 7 times more than Arizona suppliers because they must pump water over mountain ranges. Low-income Californians earning below 200% of the federal poverty level spend up to 4.4% of annual income on electricity alone, before the water bill even arrives. Water infrastructure is politically dangerous because it is invisible until it fails. Elected officials suppress rates and defer maintenance because the short-term political cost of honesty is higher than the cost of decay. But every dollar of deferred maintenance becomes roughly $4 of future capital renewal. Emergency repairs can cost up to 4.8 times as much as planned preventative work. Jackson, Mississippi showed where this road ends. Decades of rate suppression produced a $2 billion maintenance backlog against a $300 million annual budget. Then, severe winter storms ruptured century-old pipes, and more than 150,000 residents lost running water for 5 weeks. That is the future Southwestern utilities are trying to avoid, and it is why the bills keep climbing. The faucets in Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and San Diego will not simply go dry. Engineers will build alternatives, utilities will issue debt, and investors will finance the next layer of pumps, tunnels, recycling plants, and desalination. But the era when water functioned as a silent subsidy for unlimited sprawl is over. What replaces it is the true, unsubsidized cost of sustaining civilization in the desert. For 40 million residents, that cost is the silent mortgage. It may hide inside line items, fixed charges, bond covenants, and drought surcharges, but it will still arrive every month. The old bargain was cheap water today and invisible costs tomorrow. Tomorrow is here, line by line, month by month, and it compounds. The faucet stays on, the bill becomes the crisis.